Only a few. How many from the Post or the Pali News? And how many from next door? So why are you here? You're in the wrong meeting. Okay, well, let's give it a fine. We have two new board members on the task force. Carol Sanborn, right here. Thank you. And Ray who couldn't make it tonight. Some people, oh, by the way, we have a new volunteer committee. Kim Clary, who is sitting at the table, has kindly offered to chair it. We're learning more and more about volunteering. So if you are interested in helping us in some way, talk to Kim after the meeting. We are eager to figure out ways that people can volunteer and help them. Some people asked about our performance. How have we done in the 2.5 years we've been doing this? For some time now, about 70% or more of the people that we work with, Rusty and Jimmy and Glenda and Maureen, are off the streets. It's kind of an amazing number. One thing that happens, we've learned, is that after we get some housed, new people come in. So it's not like we're ever going to just get all the people we have talked with in the past off the streets, but we keep trying. Another thing that people should be aware, if you're not, that over 60 of the abandoned encampments in the bluffs are now gone. And we realize that, it's kind of amazing, that they are sort of an attractive nuisance. So if there is a lean-to or something that looks like it would be good and wasn't taken down, it just means that somebody wandering through is going to probably stay there. So we feel this is important and we're going to try to keep them clean. So with that on our agenda, I understand Janet Turner is here and has something to share with all of us.
I'm back. I was telling the congressman about this wonderful meeting last time, and he felt that it was appropriate that the leadership and the person behind pulling this together every month needed to be recognized. So I have a certificate of recognition for Doug. Indeed, Doug, for many hours, the late nights, the early mornings, the weekends, it's greatly appreciated the service you give to the community and to this task force. And you have been a guiding light for quite a while now, and done a great job. You have really been a wonderful leader. And so the Congressman would like to recognize you for your remarkable dedication and your outstanding work in coordinating all the volunteer effort and overseeing the logistics of so many of the aspects of the task force, especially, of course, the homeless count. So congratulations, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much from Congressman Ted Lieu.
Thank you.
And we didn't want to forget your lovely wife, who, because every good leader has a quiet, silent person beside them. And so if you would make sure you present this to her as well.
I will do that.
Thank
you.
We didn't want to get you in trouble with her. So thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor and privilege. Thank you. So you all have an agenda, and now we'll get on with the other part of the meeting. And I think it's useful to just start out asking the question, why housing? Why are we talking about this now? And if you think outreach is complicated, housing is even more complicated. So hang on to your hats. We're going to have an interesting evening. I hope you ask lots of questions at the end. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our Vice President and the Chair of the Communications Committee that works even harder than I do on this. So she's the one that should get the award. But thank you, Sharon Brown. It is yours.
Hello, everybody, and it's a great turnout. Thank you for being here, and I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our two speakers who we are so grateful that they are with us this evening. They work so hard, they have no spare time, and they are donating this time to be with us tonight because they understand how important this topic is and how important it is to us. When the task force started about 4 years ago, but we were on the ground 3 years, we were able to move our homeless people that accepted services fairly quickly into housing because we were in partnership with the people concerned, and our outreach team worked like lightning in finding housing for our homeless persons who were ready to enter the housing. What we're finding now is that even though our lightning team has our people ready to move into housing, that the housing is not available for them. We don't have the housing and we don't have the kind of housing that they need, particularly what's known as permanent supportive housing. So we have finally come to the conclusion that this is a topic that we read about in the newspapers, we hear about, and we think maybe it's somebody else's issue to look at. We finally concluded that as a community, we need to start to educate ourselves about this topic. What is permanent supportive housing? What are the services it offers? What are the barriers to getting it up? What's it like once it's up and operating? What are the myths? What are the realities? These meetings, I believe, have been very instrumental in our community of getting accurate information out there and helping our community to get our minds around what's the most productive way to address this issue of helping our homeless people. So tonight our agenda will be, we will hear first from Dora Gallo, CEO from a community of friends, and then Lowry Meister, president from Flyaway Homes. These are two different approaches to permanent supportive housing. Dora will lead off first, sharing her experience and what she is doing. Their bios are on the agendas, which you have. I'll tell you a little bit more about them. She'll then be followed by Laurie, who will talk about Flyaway Homes and where they are at. We'll then have time for questions and answers, and I will try to facilitate that part of the discussion so that we can ask our questions and give our speakers as much time as possible to answer the questions. So first, Dora is CEO of the Community of Friends. And Community of Friends is a nonprofit affordable housing developer whose mission is to end homelessness through the provision of quality, permanent supportive housing for people with mental illness. Under her leadership, the agency has a portfolio that has grown 240%, is currently operating 43 supportive housing communities throughout Los Angeles and Orange County, and they are housing over 2,500 people. So we'll be able to hear tonight from someone who's on the ground, is experienced, and can answer your questions from that perspective. Then we'll hear from Laurie, who's president of Flyaway Homes, a division of the Stephen Jones Development Company, which is a privately owned family business that is taking an entrepreneurial approach to meeting this housing need. And you may have seen the article in the LA Times just a few days ago about Flyaway Homes and their exciting approach to meeting this housing need. So we'll hear these two perspectives, and then hopefully we will get into answering your questions, and you will be taking notes and writing curious, deep, probing questions so we can have a brilliant discussion. All right, with that, I will turn it over to Dora. And you can come right here.
Okay, so I've been told I need to speak into the microphone.
Yes.
Does that work? Okay, great.
Perfect.
All right, let's see here. I'm also tech challenged, so. Okay, so Sharon just described her organization. Hopefully you can see the photos. Is there any way of dimming the lights a little bit? I don't know if that.
Yes.
What I do want to say is that all the images that I'm using, both people and buildings, are photos that relate to our own tenants and our buildings. They're not stock footage. So you get a sense of the quality and the type of people in our buildings. Here's our mission. It's kind of a repeat of what Sharon just said. We've been in business for 30 years this year, and I've been with the agency for 15 of those 30 years. We were founded in 1988, and we've now completed 1,970 units in 48 buildings. You heard Sharon mention 43. No, that's the right thing. Because one of the unique features about our organization as a nonprofit is our willingness and our ability and to partner with nonprofit social service organizations who want to own their own buildings but don't want to develop the development capacity. I don't think this is working. And so what we've done is partner with these organizations, and over a period of time when they are familiar with operating and reporting and everything that goes with managing a building, we actually pull out of the partnership and they own the building free and clear without our participation. So we've done that 5 times. So while we say we've completed 48, we only really have 43 that we're managing right now. You can see in that 3rd bullet. We work in 5 counties now. Our operating buildings have been completed are in Orange County and Los Angeles County, but we purchased property in Riverside County, San Bernardino County, and we were just selected by the city of Ventura to develop a veterans project on a 9-acre site in their county. And I mentioned the partnerships. Not only do we do services partnerships, development partnerships, with organizations, but we also have learned over time that our expertise is in development and operating. And if we are in a particular community where there's a strong social service agency, we don't need to recreate the wheel. If they're willing to partner with us, then we invite them to come in and provide the services in the buildings together with the tenants who live there. And in many cases, we pass through services funding to them and enable them to do that. So who we serve both individuals and families. When we first started as an organization, we focused primarily on single adults. And I should mention we have a unique history because we were actually formed with seed funding from the LA County Department of Mental Health. Over 30 years ago, in the 80s, when there was the institutionalization, there were a lot of people who were on the streets who had a mental illness, and LA County Department of Health would work with individuals and they couldn't find them. And so they sought nonprofit organizations that were in existence at the time to provide housing, and not many organizations were willing to do that because it's a very difficult group of people to serve, and if you didn't have the experience, it was a lot easier to serve families, low-income families and low-income individuals. So they created our organization, and our name comes from a desire to create a community where people can be among friends. So that's where our name Community of Friends come from. So we started serving individuals, but over time, particularly in the, I think it was the late 90s, and we started noticing families, primarily single mothers, a child or two, living in their cars or in their shelters or even on the streets, and we started building for them as well. Now we've become known really as a provider of special needs housing, being able to combine both services, construction, and property management all in one facility. And so we've been asked to do veterans housing. We've expanded expertise to serve emancipated foster youth leaving the system. We have a number of buildings for older adults, and then we also serve just regular local families as well. This is a sense of our portfolio. It doesn't list the San Bernardino and Orange County properties. And I should also mention that about 15 years ago, we were invited by the city of San Diego to come in and create a nonprofit to do exactly what we were doing. Actually, they invited us to come in and develop, but a 2-hour commute on a regular basis was really hard, and our board wasn't ready to expand to have a satellite campus. So we actually created another nonprofit, filed the board of directors, filed incorporation papers, completed the first 2 buildings for them, and again, we pulled out and deeded the buildings over. That organization, PACS, is still in existence, and if you go to the website, they list us as a founder. So what is supportive housing? There's a lot of misperceptions and miscommunication about what it is. I was just in a meeting today where we were talking about all the different types of things we can call shelters, bridge housing, transitional housing, facility, and really permanent supportive housing is first and foremost an apartment building where people live independently. They have their lease. It's for people who've experienced homelessness and have some sort of disability. Our focus, I mentioned, is mental illness, although we do take, many of our tenants have substance abuse addictions. We also have people who might have developmental disabilities, physical disabilities. So anyone who has experienced homelessness and have a disability and live in an apartment really qualifies for supportive housing. Housing is not time limited, and that's really important because that's where the word permanent comes from. It doesn't mean that they never leave. It just means that they, like anyone who is renting an apartment, have that freedom to choose. And so it's not time limited. As long as they comply with their lease terms, they pay the rent, they can live there as long as their lease allows for it. Rent has to be affordable. So all permanent supportive housing developments, all their apartments, are generally the rent is fixed at approximately 30% of that person's income, no matter what that is. From an operations standpoint, the way it allows us to maintain the building, obviously we need some additional income. 30% of someone who's on disability is insufficient. So we tend to work with the housing authorities to secure some sort of rental subsidy, like a Section 8, for the remaining rents in order to allow us to maintain the building. The other component of permanent supportive housing is that services are on-site. There are some who will have services off-site, and that's fine as long as it's in close proximity, because one of the things that we want to do is once someone who's been homeless, have a disability, been out in the streets or in shelters for a long time, we want to engage them in services. And telling them they have to go down the street 3 blocks away sometimes is a little hard for them to follow through on. So it's helpful to have the services in the buildings where the social workers can keep an eye out. Someone's, going down to the mailbox. It's easy for someone to leave their office and say, "Hi, how are you doing? You don't seem to be managing your physical appearance very well. What's going on?" So services being on site, and some of the services include like one-on-one meetings. We call that kind of in some ways case management. Independent living skills, teaching them how to cook again, clean again, how to take regular showers, making sure they go to the medical appointments. Those are some of the services that are provided. And we do a lot of referrals. Everyone is different, everyone has different needs, and while some person might have medical conditions they need to attend to, others do not. And so referrals, people need food banks, or sometimes they really want to connect to their faith again. And so the staff spends considerable amount of time helping people navigate resources that are available to them. And one of the most important kind of approaches we use is trauma-informed care. Almost everyone who's been on the streets for some period of time who end up in our buildings has experienced some sort of trauma, whether it's immediate, really before moving into the buildings, or it could be sometime in their past, in their childhood, which has kind of been the cause of their homelessness. So what does permanent supportive housing look like? It looks like a regular apartment building. Now, when we first started, we did some new construction. We did a lot of rehab also. So I identified some of the buildings so you can see where they're located. California Hotels in San Pedro, that happens to be the atrium of a building, a brick building. Fox Normandy is in Koreatown. Willow Apartments is in South Los Angeles. That's a new construction project. Amistad Apartments is in Lincoln Heights. And you can even see the style of the building. We try to match what's kind of in the neighborhood. We don't want to look too different because we do want to blend in. And in Hollywood, a little bit different, more modern. Silver Star Apartments is for veterans, and that's one of the ones we just completed, I think, not quite a year ago. And Silver Star Apartments is one of our most environmentally innovative buildings. We've already won 8 awards, including 3 national awards since we've opened. It recycles all the water on the property for potable purposes, and it is considered LEED Platinum. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that environmental designation. We have solar thermal to heat up the hot water, and we have solar power on that particular building. Van Nuys in the San Fernando Valley. This is actually one of my favorite exterior design buildings. Avenida Villas in Anaheim, they wanted something more craftsman-oriented, so we delivered on that. Anaheim also wanted something, I kind of laughed when I saw the building because it literally has a white picket fence in front. But that was the style that the community wanted, and we provided that. Cedar Springs is in Laverne, all the way close to San Bernardino County, and the city wanted a different type of style for that. As you can see, Spanish architecture. And you see the community room, which is quite nice, on the lower right corner. Some of the interior views, you can see the outside, but what does the inside look like? We almost always have some sort of computer rooms, particularly if it's a family building. In some of our buildings, we also have been able to incorporate licensed childcare or early education center by partnering with organizations to come in and provide that. And how is it funded? I think I can spend a long time on this, but I'm going to just briefly touch upon some of the funding that's necessary for permanent supportive housing. One of the ways we describe it, and for me when I describe it to our board members, is that it really is a three-legged stool. You have to have construction funding, you have to have services funding, and you have to have the rental subsidies, so some sort of operating subsidy to help us with enough income to maintain the building. None of the lenders or investors or government agencies that we work with will allow us to start construction unless all three sources are in place. Because they know what we're proposing to do, they know who we're serving, and they know that it doesn't make sense for them to give us money to build it if I don't have the services to provide to the people living in there. And if I have the services and the construction funding, but if people aren't paying any rent, I'm not going to be able to maintain that building. It's going to be of light to the community. So part of the difficulty, and I'm going to talk about challenges in a minute, is putting together all the funding resources. And on the construction side, one of the things I want to say is that no one funding source, no one agency, state, local, federal, or even the banks, anybody will give us the full amount of money necessary to build the building. We have to do what's called leveraging. Take one source, leverage it to get something else. And so we're building what some people call the capital stack. And when you have multiple funding sources, they each have their different funding application timelines. And so this one you might apply, you might have to wait another 8 months before you can apply for another one. Because I think some of you know that it takes a long time. Well, why does it take a long time? And some of it is the funding process. For a very long time, there was insufficient resources to build supportive housing in the city of Los Angeles. I mean, actually, I would say not until 10 plus years ago did the city really even make permanent supportive housing a priority. So we were doing this work by trying to fit our what we were trying to do into existing resources. The city's permanent supportive housing funding application did become available until 2007. And now recently with Proposition HHH, which the voters of Los Angeles passed, and then Measure H, which the county residents passed, it provided the construction funding and the services funding to really address homelessness once and for all. So we're really excited about that. There are also some state resources that are coming down the pipeline. I don't think I put enough, but I put about 20 or so pieces of paper in the back of the room to talk about 2 ballot measures that will be in the November ballot. Proposition 1 I think the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act, that's going to be $4 billion statewide for the construction of housing of all types, not just permanent supportive housing. And Proposition 2 is also called the No Place Like Home Initiative. That is a repurposing of the millionaire's tax from 2004. That measure is about $2 billion. And it's not necessarily new money. I want to kind of make it clear, there's a lot of confusion about Proposition 2. In 2003, I guess, when the voters passed that millionaire's tax to fund mental health services, it was exactly that, mental health services. And the counties were able to carve out a very small percentage to use for housing construction. And what's happened over time is there are some localities that have not spent their money, so it's been piling up. So the state legislature wanted to reprogram about $2 billion of that bonding authority from services into housing, very specific, not by county, but just statewide. and someone sued and said, you can't do that. The voters voted to use it for services. So it's been hung up in the courts for 2 years. And so finally, the state legislature said, you know what? We're going to just go to the voters and ask for their permission. So that way, that lawsuit that's still hung out, that can just go away. So that's on the ballot. And what we're trying to inform people is you've actually already approved this for mental health related services, and what more important value can you provide for someone who is homeless and have a mental health disability to provide them housing. So we're hoping that people will vote for that. And I can go into some of these different sources a little bit later when in the Q&A section. You know, I want to talk a little bit about our approach. I would, you know, every community is different, and those developers, because we are a developer, even though we call ourselves a nonprofit developer, and someone in the audience at a community meeting called it an oxymoron, but so we are a nonprofit developer. There are no bonuses, you know, we don't, you know, there's nothing that we take home. Everything that we make gets reinvested in organizations and can build more housing. And when we find a specific location, and how we approach a project is that we really look at the community. You know, I mentioned the design is supposed to fit in, unless for some reason the community wanted something different. And in our Hollywood project, the community wanted something very different. And we look at what's around there, what kind of amenities can complement what we're proposing to do in the building. And we certainly meet with community groups to find out what the housing needs are. You know, the need is so great in Los Angeles for veterans, for seniors, for families, for adults. We'll go into a community, look to see what the homeless count shows in terms of its, where the lack of housing is, and then we'll work with the community group. You know, we proposed a project that's starting construction next month in Sun Valley, and we went in thinking we were going to just house single adults, and that community told us that they had a lot of older adults, a lot of seniors who were homeless in their community, and they even pointed, look at that guy over there, you know, he must be in this whatever age, I'm not going to say an age, so we turned into a senior a senior supported housing project. It made sense, the demographics showed it, and so we worked with that community to do that. And you know, we always look at design. Design is critically important. We want to be the neighborhood's pride also, and so we take care from both an exterior and interior standpoint to make sure that the building is of quality. Services, we spend a lot of time talking about what the services needs are. We share that with the community that we're working in, see if there's additional feedback. And more often than not, communities will tell us, well, there's a nonprofit down the street that offers, you know, after-school education. Maybe your families will want to participate, or there's a Boys and Girls Club. And so it's been really great to have those kind of dialogues with communities that we're in. We know property management is really important, as I mentioned that. You know, one of the things that happens quite often is that communities that express initial concern over our projects and what they may look like, after we open, we never hear from them again. And I'm not saying that we don't continue to engage in community conversations, continue to go to neighborhood council meetings and such, but we find that there's a lot of misperceptions about what supportive housing is. I think people in their mind think about the old public housing concept from 30, 50 years ago. And then top of mind for us, because we are a nonprofit, we do not sell our buildings. We're not intended to make a profit. Our goal is to maintain those buildings for a very long time, and so we use quality materials, and we hire the right people to help us do that. Barriers, just touching briefly upon barriers. You know, the real estate market actually plays havoc on us too. We're subject to it just like everybody else. Land costs, you know, when the market is hot, you know, we have a hard time finding property and buying property, and being able to close escrow in a 30-day period. We typically take, though we're faster now, we typically take, you know, 90 days or longer. The reason I say we're faster is that we've been able to secure acquisition lines of credits. We're already pre-approved, so we can close a lot faster and compete. But it's still very hard. And I can tell you some stories about that. But I think construction costs, you know, we do well when the economy is not doing so well because general contractors are looking for work, right? So, and so when things, even now with the tariffs on steel and lumber, it's really impacting our bidding process, because I mentioned we're going to start construction next month. And our lumber guy, none of the lumber guys would hold their bids for more than a day. So it's been really difficult. And certainly community opposition, community concerns have caused delays in starting projects. And have, when I say delays, because of the extended amount of time we have to engage in meetings. You know, in Silver Lake, I quote that a lot. Silver Lake, a very pretty progressive community. I was already in construction, but I still went to 9 neighborhood council meetings over a span of a year and a half, just to answer questions and to make sure that the community knew how we were going to operate the building. Other, barriers, the planning approval process does take a long time. Now, recently the City Council adopted a new ordinance, the permanent supportive housing ordinance, that's going to streamline things quite a bit, but that actually is now held up in litigation by 2 community groups out of the West Side. So we're waiting for that to be resolved. The funding process I mentioned, the timing, it used to be, and things are a little bit better now, it used to be that when we were awarded, some of the funders, they would award us, funds to build a project, but it's only for 2 years. And meanwhile, I'm trying to apply for additional sources. By the time I get other sources, that other one is expiring, the commitment. So they got rid of that for the most part. Now there's a little bit more patience. They do tell you, most of the funders say, after 3 years, we're gonna look at you again and say what's going on, but they've at least extended that time frame. But it's still not easy because you're doing multiple applications each time, and each funder wants at least 3 copies of the same application, so a lot of binders and papers. And shifting policy priorities, we might be developing housing for families, and all of a sudden veterans become the hot topics. And so then, we lined everything up for a family project, and now we're supposed to exchange shares. Or we were going to house someone who was in the immediate vicinity, and we're told that we have to prioritize based on some other conditions. And so that always, that targeting always is of concern to us, and one reason we engage in advocacy. I think that's it. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer some questions.
Yeah, I think the lights up a little bit, if we can get them up a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit more would be great.
Yeah, can we turn the lights on just in back?
Or the lights on the speaker would be great. Not that light. That light. This can go away.
Sorry. Well, that's my problem.
Oh, perfect. That's great.
Is that better?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Dora. That was fantastic, and I am just really heartened by the work that a community of friends has done all over this greater 5-county area, and we really think of ourselves as partners, not competitors in any way, shape, or form. We all of us really have the mission of wanting to solve the homeless problem. And so I am here today to talk about building permanent supportive housing with a different funding model, and that is with social impact equity. And I'll explain it a little bit what that is. So this number is really disheartening. 53,195 people who are on our streets. And I think the work that you all are doing to get people housed is just incredible. But we have a very long way to go. And I think that we have just all lost a sense of hope. I mean, you hear the incredible projects that a community of friends is doing, and believe me, 43 buildings, 48 buildings with that number of people, that's fabulous. But when you're facing numbers like this, it just seems like it's not enough, and that we have to figure out a way to do more and more quickly. So Dora has explained some of the roadblocks, and I sort of want to tell you our perspective on it a little bit, because we have a very different background. My background is in commercial real estate development, so it's just a different perspective, but actually the same conclusions. The construction costs are a huge issue. Not only is it material and labor, but a lot of it is the code requirements that the city has put on buildings over the past 10, 15 years. You know about Title 24 and LID, where you have to treat the water runoff, and CEQA, which requires an intensive environmental review and can add to the construction costs. So, and believe me, I care about the environment, but all of these things have really made the cost of construction incredibly high. And so it is a pretty common statistic these days that one unit of permanent supportive housing is $450,000 or more in the city of Los Angeles. And you know, when you think of building a single family home, that just, it seems crazy. But the reason is the code requirements and actually some of the specific requirements related to permanent supportive housing. The lead times are incredibly long. Dora hit upon the permitting process, but it can take a year or more just to get your building permit. And when you go through the community interaction and everything else, it can take even longer than that. And as I said before, we just don't have time. Community backlash and the NIMBYism just really holds things up. And so we need to try to figure out a way to get the community on our side and show them that these projects are really helping, that they improve your property values. They don't take away. But that is going to take advocacy, and it's going to take groups like yours to really speak out about this and make them aware. And believe me, there are a lot of fantastic groups like a Community of Friends that are doing really good work, but it just isn't enough to meet the need when you see the growing numbers. And you know, a lot of traditional affordable housing developers depend on low-income tax credits. But with the tax cuts that we've had recently, one concern that we have is maybe that's a model that could be under threat because it makes those tax credits that much less interesting or less appealing from an investment standpoint. So this is our team. As I said, we have a very different background. None of us have been affordable housing developers. My father, Stephen Jones, and I have been working together for almost 28 years. He founded Stephen Jones Development Company in 1965. We own about 18 properties throughout the greater West LA area. We also have Sarah Jessup, who is a consultant and has a CPA background. She is just an ace manager. Kevin Harai is our COO, and he is a really great project manager and property manager. He has a company called Bella Vista Property Management that manages a lot of regular apartment buildings all over the county, but a lot of them are in South Los Angeles. And John Bartholomew has been helping us out on the construction side. So we have taken a little bit of a different approach. And the way that this really got started was that Stephen came into my office one day when we were really advocating for Prop HHH, and we were excited about it, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, you know, I heard today that it's going to cost $450,000 for one person. And if you divide that out into the $1.2 billion that we have for Prop HHH, that's something like 2,400 people if they were to fund projects 100%, which they're not doing. So, you know, again, it's not gonna, so we said we have to take a different approach. So essential to this effort was our partnership with the People Concern, and I know you all have worked with them. We think that they just do fantastic work with this community. They really understand what their needs are. And they said, we are so desperate for housing for our people. We will master lease the building if you build it for us. We will provide all the support services. We will get the funding that's so necessary there. And we will help you design the units to make sure that they fit their needs. And this was really important to us because we didn't have a background in that area at all. And they've been successfully placing people in permanent supportive housing. I didn't realize this, but for over 20 years, and in shared housing for over 10 years. And they actually have a client retention rate of about 95%, where the national average is a lot less than that. And that is a fantastic thing. So why is our approach different, or why is it new? Well, the first thing is that we knew that we needed to get down the permitting and construction time. And so we very quickly found that we could do that by using modular units. And the reason why modular units are so compelling is that they are actually a product that's stamped and approved by the state of California. So the modular manufacturers can get their permits in 3 months. And the city of Los Angeles only looks at our zoning requirements, the setbacks, the height limit. We have to go get the site work and the lid approval, and so that site work area approved by the city. But we were able to get those permits in 3 months as well. So cutting down the permitting time from over a year to 3 months was a really big step. The construction cost itself is not that much less expensive, so there isn't that benefit, but the construction time is a lot shorter. So while we're doing our work on the property, they are making the units in the factory, so that as soon as we're done with our foundations, they can bring the units to the property, and literally they assemble 1 floor in a day. And it takes time for them to do all the connections and everything, but from beginning to end, we can build a permanent supportive project in 6 months from the time we have our permits. And if I were to try to build a project even as small as ours, our projects are about 7,500 to 8,500 square feet, it would probably take me over a year, if not longer. The second thing that is unique about our projects is that we use a shared living concept. So we knew we needed the cost of construction, so per unit is not necessarily less expensive, but the cost per person is substantially less. So we have a pilot project that's under construction down in South Los Angeles, and our average cost per person, including the land and the soft costs, is $109,000. So every person has their own bedroom, but they share a kitchen area, living space, a bathroom, a dining area, and then we've also programmed the outside. I'll show you that. The third thing that makes our projects unique is that we do not use any government funding whatsoever. So we fund our projects at this point 100% with social impact equity. And so we go to private investors and we offer them a modest return on their investment. In exchange, they get a return, but they also get to help us solve this problem. And so the return that we've offered is 5% on their money, and we were able to raise $3.6 million from individuals who felt like they were earning a decent return, but they were also getting to really help the community at the same time. I've told you that our project is master leased to the people concerned. So how do we generate income in order to pay our investors the return? So the tenants pay rent, just like with the traditional affordable housing model, but their rent is $550 a month, which is more, frankly, than that 30% threshold. But it's a number that the people concerned has told us that they think people can live on. We're trying to figure out other ways that we can support these communities and make sure that they can indeed exist on the other about 50% of their income. We're working with faith communities in the area to support these communities, and we have other ideas as well. We did have to get a subsidy from the County of Los Angeles's Department of Health called Brilliant Corners for 20 of our beds, so that we could hit that 5% return to our investors on this pilot project. We may need to have that kind of subsidy going forward to a certain extent. except that we're really working with other modular manufacturers to get our cost of construction down, and we're really hopeful that we can, so that we won't depend on it as much, or maybe even at all going forward. And as I said, the People Concerned provides all the support services, so we are strictly the developer. So this is our pilot project. It's actually called the Stephen K. Jones Supportive Community. And the total cost was $3.6 million, so $109,000 per person, about $407 per square foot in hard costs, and about $450 per square foot overall. So it wasn't cheap. But we were able to get our plans done in 3 months, and the construction time, active construction time, we ran into a few little hiccups with our modular manufacturer, but the active construction time was about 7 months, and it will be completed in the middle of September, and as I said, the return is about 5%. So this is the layout of every 4-bedroom unit. So as you can see, each person has their own private space, which is essential. But then the kitchen area is on the left, and there's a bathroom area, there's a storage closet on the right, where each person will have their own little cubby and storage space, a sitting area with a TV and a dining table. So in about 800 square feet altogether. We actively programmed the outdoor space as well, because we knew that people would need to be able to get out of their units, and we're lucky to live in wonderful weather, and so we have a community room inside the building at the front of the property, and we also have an on-site manager. Even though we weren't required, we knew that that would be a real asset to the project. Outside of the community room is a breakout space for group sessions. We have an elevator. The building is fully ADA accessible on the ground floor and ADA adaptable on the second and third floors. So we're attuned to the fact that many of our tenants will have disabilities, perhaps physical disabilities as well. And then there's a barbecue area with a lounge. You can't see it so well, but in that sort of field of trees. Many of our tenants will have comfort animals, so we have a dog play area at the back of the property, and then a community vegetable garden on the back of the building. We were required to put, this was before the PSH ordinance took effect, so we were required to put in 3 parking spaces, which will be used by the manager and the caseworker. If this PSH ordinance does stay in effect, then we would have reduced parking going forward, and we could build even more units on a property like this. And I should say that the work that we did on this project was really a labor of love, not only for our team. So none of us at Flyaway Homes are taking any kind of a salary in any way, but we also really leveraged off of and appealed to professionals who we had worked with to donate their services. And I want to commend Gustav Soderberg, who is in the audience, who is our architect and donated his time pro bono. He is a name architect with BTBS, our landscape architect, our civil engineer. Everyone worked with us on this initial project so that we could make it happen. This is the view of what the units will look like from the inside. So, we hope to have nice furnishings. The People Concerned provides all of the furniture inside the units. I really didn't hit on this too much before, but the modular units that we've used for this first project are from repurposed shipping containers. And so the idea that you would think putting people in a shipping container would be a negative thing, but as you can see from the images, the ceilings are actually 9.5 feet tall. And in every other unit, we have floor-to-ceiling glass with operable windows. So the space is actually very light and airy inside. The walls are furred out and to run the electrical and plumbing, and so it's actually drywall, just like you would have with any other type of construction. And the units are fully insulated, so exterior, all the exterior walls in between each floor. We have rigid insulation on the roof underneath the building, and I was out there today without any air conditioning running, and it actually was very temperate inside the space. So really the shipping container is just the structure that we use in order to build the buildings more quickly. And there are about 4 million abandoned shipping containers down in the Port of Long Beach. So we're actually, in a way, sort of helping the environment at the same time. This is a picture of the factory as the shipping containers are being built. It's actually a fascinating process. The raw shipping container comes in one end and the completed unit comes out the other end. They put a steel structure on top of the shipping container, and that becomes the walkway for the floor above. So you can imagine when they're all connected, you have one walkway. And then this is a picture of the modules being lifted into space, into their spot. We have the scaffolding up so that they can just finish the seams. There's actually more work than we anticipated that goes on after the units come to the property. But really, the units themselves should be completed about 2 months from the time that the last unit is delivered to the site. And so, what is our advantage? We do all of our projects by right, which means that we are not required to have any kind of an environmental review process or community engagement. We met with our councilman, this is in District 8, and he told us that we wouldn't have his support unless we went to a neighborhood council meeting, and we were really nervous about it. We'd heard horror stories, but we had an amazing amount of support from the local community. There really was one person who had a negative comment or who didn't want this. And part of it is, although we go through the city's housing process to place people in this property, we're really making a distinct effort to house people who live in South Los Angeles now. And almost a third of the population, I think, is down in that greater area. And you think it's bad around here, you should go down there. Where they have alleys behind their houses, literally it's a tent city from one end of the alley to the other. And so the community was thrilled that someone would come there and build this in their neighborhood. And we could say to them, look, we have individuals who want to invest in your neighborhood. And they do believe that it's going to help their property values. They haven't had a lot of new construction recently down there. I've told you that the modular construction reduces our material costs and time a little, but it really reduces our time to market. We have lower labor costs. The labor that they use in the factory is factory type labor. They're still skilled, obviously, but it's a different type of worker than a construction worker who would come to the property. We have a very simple equity model, so it isn't complicated, it's pretty straightforward, and minimal market risk because the property is 100% leased and we don't have to worry about tenant rollover or move out, so the people concerned has really taken on that role and that responsibility. So now that we are about done with our first project, which was a real learning experience, we're ready to move on and figure out where we go from here. One thing that we found in raising the money for the first project was that people felt that the 5% return was a little low given the risks of construction. So we've decided to bifurcate the investment and develop with a line of credit. And then once the projects are complete, transfer it to an investment LLC that would own the completed project. and attract investors at that point in time, because then they're just investing in 100% leased property that has a very steady cash flow stream. The lease has an annual cost of living adjustment, so it may start at 5% in year 1, but it goes up to almost 6% at year 2 with a little bit over a 2% annual increase. And we think it will be much easier for us to attract that investment capital. So we are putting together a fund that will be about $30 million. We think that will enable us to build 7 or 8 projects, depending on how large they are. We are targeting corporations, so you may have heard that Kaiser came out recently and said they wanted to invest $200 million in permanent supportive housing, and we're hoping we could be a candidate for that, as well as foundations that have decided to invest a portion of their endowment in projects that relate to their mission. So that's called PRI investing, and we've already started to have some discussion there and have some significant interest. We are talking to individuals as well. We're thinking that we would start perhaps a construction fund to fund the construction, and so we're thinking about putting together a leadership construction fund where we would pay, investors could invest in that, and we would pay them a 5% return during the construction period, and then transfer it to the investment LLC. So, this is my little provocative thing, but you should know that I grew up in the Palisades, and I have lived here since I was 2 years old. So this is my hometown, and there is a philosophy in this area that says that people should really be housed in the neighborhoods where they live, and that you shouldn't export people from one part of the city to the other. And I subscribe to that thinking. I think that that is true. And so I want you all to think, could we as a community have our own permanent supportive housing project? Could we raise the money as a community for our homeless neighbors and give them a home? So the tricky thing is obviously, where would you put it? There are not a whole lot of options, but there is this little piece of property right just south of Pali High before you get to where Temescal Canyon starts. It's not zoned properly. It would take a fair amount of work for us to put that together. But I would be very interested in discussing that with you all if you were interested. I think we could put together a project that would house 30 or 40 people. They would have the support services that they need so that they wouldn't be a blight on our community. We would be safer. They would be safer. And it just seems to me that it would be the right thing to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you to both of our speakers, and now we'd like to ask you to come and sit here in the front, and each of you have a microphone, and the spotlight is on you, and do I have lights on enough here? Is that better? We can all see. So with that, do we have any questions? Doug is going to move the mic around. You have the mic here. And we'd like you to tell us who you'd like to direct your question to, and then try to make it as specific and crisp as you can. So let's start right here. Right here.
And speak right into the microphone.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Lavanas, and I'm very impressed with both your presentations. It was so interesting. Recently, we've had a project in the Palisades for seniors that's come under tremendous opposition. And I'm wondering, I look at your proposal for something by Pali High, and I think, oh my God, the community is going to go nuts. So how do you address those kinds of community concerns?
So maybe we can hear from both of you. Maybe Laura, you talk about that a little bit, and then what has been your experience, Dora?
Well, Dora has a whole lot more experience with this than I do. I believe in just being upfront and sharing the advantages of having people housed versus having people in the canyons on the street without those support services, and the risks that go along with that, the safety risks, the property risks, everything else. I think that touring people through projects, it's hard once people are living there, but if they could actually see it and see how it operates, I think they would realize, Dora's facilities look like any other normal apartment building. You would really not know that it's permanent supportive housing at all. And I thought her statement that all the opposition is before it's built was really an interesting one. But as I said, I really haven't had any experience, so I don't know how to go about doing it. I would love to hear what Dora's thoughts are.
Gird your loins.
Gird your loins.
There are a lot of people who say different things about these type of meetings and community concerns. I rarely use I rarely use the word NIMBY, which stands for not in my backyard, because I think people have concerns, and they're legitimate concerns. You always hear, you cannot disregard someone's feelings. They feel the way they do, right? So my approach is to find out what the concerns are. But I want people to be honest about that. If someone tells me I don't have enough parking, well, my tenants don't thrive. If they tell me I don't have enough open space, which is what happened in a project where I had 10,000 square feet of open space, and I was told I didn't have enough open space. When they keep throwing out these issues, they're not real issues. We're just going to go around and around in a circle. When someone tells me they're afraid, or they saw this, will you have this in your building? Then I can answer the question and try to address whatever concerns people have. And so that's one reason I mentioned the situation where we were on meetings over a span of a year and a half. I just kept going back over and over again. So they can see that we're not going to go away, that we have just as much determination and persistence as they do, but that we're willing to engage. It's not easy, and what I would ask for those who do support this type of development and do support an avenue to ending homelessness is that you come out to speak in support of that too. It really helps me when I'm in a room of 50 people and there's 4 people in the back nodding, I feel like I have a little bit of support to keep going. And so that's a role you guys can play. But ask the questions and be honest about it. And sometimes you may say, I know this sounds bad, but that's okay, because you have to be honest about it. If you're not honest, you're not going to get an honest answer. So it's just keep going at it and doing the best we can. I agree about the tours. Everybody will get their concerns satisfied in different ways. Some people are satisfied by tours. Others want to actually meet the tenants in our buildings. Others want to talk to, the police department. And so everybody has a different way of doing it. And so we try to make all those opportunities available during that process of community engagement.
Rusty has a question.
I just want to offer just a quick observation because I have a pretty unique position. I've been in one of these buildings down closer to downtown in Koreatown, and I will tell you that I was shocked that it was what it was. It was impeccably kept. The crime in the area, because everybody wants to talk to the police officer about the crime. I'm telling you, there was no crime specific to that building that would not have, and actually I would say there was no crime in that particular building, but it was not unlike any other apartment complex around. Actually, I would say it was a bit more on the positive column because there was so much care for the building, and the building, clearly the people that designed it, and now I can see who that is, had some vision, and the place was very well kept. Each floor was, again, it was impeccable. And again, being a police officer and seeing the end result, I saw happy people that were obviously down on their luck at one point, but now we're in a position where they were doing much better. So this is unsolicited, but just in listening to you guys and watching the presentation, I've worked around the city and I had an occasion to be in one of those buildings, and I was very impressed with everything that came with it.
Dora, can you talk a little bit more about the kinds of people who live in permanent supportive housing. I think we've heard here, at least on the task force leadership, the concerns about that, a fear of the unknown, of the kinds of people. Are they supervised? If we have them in our community, do we need to be afraid?
You know, the first response always, they're already in your community, right? And so it's better for them to be in a building where you know that there are staff and property managers and such that is there and that there are security cameras in the building than it is not knowing what's outside. And once they're in a building, then the services can be provided. So the people, every developer owner probably has a different target population. So I can only speak to in general and what's specifically in our buildings. I mentioned house people who've been homeless who have a mental health diagnosis. And for those who are familiar, we're looking at Axis 1 diagnosis. So I do have people who are bipolar. I do have people who are schizophrenia. I do have people with major depression and PTSD. Those are the 4 major categories. There's the other groups, and I'm not from the health field or the mental health field. I come from it from a policy. I was an analyst, so, but in housing issues, and so I know the housing side. When I came to the agency, I had to learn the mental health side. And so I have those folks, but what I would say is these people are able to live independently with support, and that's why you have the term permanent and supportive housing. If someone truly doesn't understand a lease that they're signing, that they're entering into, they probably are not suitable for permanent supportive housing. It's an apartment. They have to understand they have to pay rent and abide by the lease rules, not disturbing the common areas and the people. And so now it doesn't mean that maybe someone is experiencing more voices than normal and they start to yell. That happens in our buildings, but we have the services staff, we have the property manager, we can then call the right people to provide the services to comfort them, to stay with them until whatever is happening to them subsides. And so you would want that in a building. You don't want that out in the streets where it's a danger to you and perhaps to the police officer who's confronting the person. So, so those are the folks who are living in our building. We see a lot of people affected by trauma, and it can manifest itself in different ways. But people who've been affected by trauma from a child or from an adult, and post-traumatic stress disorder, we use that as a term to for a lot of veterans. But people who are not veterans also experience that, and so that is a big part of the tenants who are in our building.
That's very helpful and wonderful that you are willing to talk with communities about that, because I think that's a very important element in a community being comfortable. We have 25 people in our community who are on the streets, who, if there was housing available here, might be able to move into that housing. They are with us now, and we know many of them. So understanding that dynamic and just starting to think about it, take one little step, is a helpful thing.
Can I say also one thing too, is that I say this a lot, is that they're just people.
Yes.
They're people, and they have families, and so I remind people that, because even if it's single adults, I have gotten emails, I've gotten phone calls. I sat with somebody explaining permanent supportive housing, thinking that this is something they are interested in. At the end of the meeting, he says, "My son lives in one of your buildings." And I didn't even know, I thought he was, I don't know what I thought he wanted to learn how to build and was learning about the model. And it was a building in Koreatown, and he said he's lived there for 13 years, and every time I go, it was just really interesting, and I immediately thought, oh, we've got to replace the carpet, but it was really great, and they're just people with family connections too.
Yes.
Quick question for Dora. Is it feasible to be very selective about who can be in that housing unit? Low acuity only, or women who are victims of domestic violence, or something? Is that possible?
More so the victims of domestic violence or survivors, veterans, seniors, but not the disability. You cannot discriminate on the basis of disability. Because someone did ask me, can you serve people with physical disabilities and not mental health disabilities? But disability is a disability, and if I showed you the slide where I said homelessness with a disability, we focus on mental health. That's our preference. We ask for that. And then what they do is they give us people who've been homeless the longest, who may or may not have the mental health. So our ability to provide services crosses all kinds, but the low acuity, so this is one of the things, the advantages of what Flyaway Homes is doing. When you don't take government funds, you could say, I want a lower acuity, but if I'm taking government funds, I can't do that. And so, I mean, it's interesting because we are exploring a very similar model. Also, not with modular, because I think it's just as expensive, but different ways of funding it so that we can serve more people. And I can serve someone who's in that particular neighborhood and not someone in a general vicinity.
Yes, let's take a question over here, Doug.
Thank you very much, Dora and Dora.
Hold the microphone nice and close to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate what you're both doing. I have a question for Lori. I wanted to know, when you raised the 3.6 million, what was the average amount of money that you got from each individual group?
So our minimum was $50,000, but I would say the average was closer to 100,000.
Carol?
And one other thing that I'd like to share with Dora is that, you know, we see part of our mission as sharing our model and what we're doing with other developers. And as we're out raising money and everything, I'm hoping I can partner with Dora and we can do projects together, because it's a lot of work putting together one of these projects, and they have incredible expertise in this area, as you saw tonight. And so I'm really thinking that that's the way where together we're going to do this. So I'm really excited about that.
We're getting to know each other.
To follow up on your comment, Lori, I hope you do challenge our community to do just that. And I hope that with all that we've learned in this endeavor for the last couple of years, we remember at least two things. That all of us who've lived any time in the Palisades at all have had some experience in their neighborhood of something being built that they didn't want. And they have survived, and they have thrived, and it's been okay. And the other thing to remember, to pick up on what you've said, Cora, is that all of us have those people living in our neighborhoods anyhow. Not just on the street, but in our neighborhoods. Whether they be substance abusers, whether there's domestic violence, whether there's mental illness, it's there already. And I think if we can keep those things in mind, we might be able to accept your challenge.
Any other questions? Yes.
I wonder who owns.
And I'll come to you in the back right after.
I wonder who owns that piece of property south of the high school.
So it's public land. No, it's city owned.
LAUSD.
Yeah, it is LAUSD. So that would be tricky, but I will tell you one other thought. Yes, I know, but one other thought that I had that I'll share with you all is I think that we should look at some of our faith communities in the Palisades and see if there's excess land that they may have. And perhaps it's partnering with them. So look around, see what else is out there. You all know this city as well, a town, as well as I do.
Okay, question in back there.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Zasloff. I live around here, and I should tell my bias, because I've worked with Dora on a couple of things on the legal side.
Okay.
That's
Well, welcome.
known as full disclosure.
Welcome.
But I was wondering what both of your thoughts are on what are the ways in which communities make a permanent supportive housing project as successful as it can be. Now, maybe the answer is nothing. Don't worry about it. Once we finish building one of these things, you won't notice the difference. Don't worry your pretty little head, which would be great. But there may be other ways in which the community, if people are afraid of things happening in a community, that a community can work with the residents in a particular development and be supportive of the supportive services, which could be something a little bit more beneficial. I did some of the work on the New Directions project in North Hills, and they hated it, and now maybe they don't pay any attention to it. But I think there would be some way for community to be involved with on an ongoing basis.
Can You know, we served the Neighborhood Council Review Commission together. 18 months of our lives. We will never get back. So we have some buildings in some communities where the neighbors are active with us. So we do our tenants will do neighborhood cleanups with the community. We've also had some where people will limited, because we, you know, as an organization that's so focused on development and services operations, we don't do a lot of volunteer projects, you know, but we occasionally would have someone from the community volunteer and offer a class to some of the tenants. They may have a special skill set. I always joke about knitting, like, you know, nobody knits anymore, it seems like, but you know, there are, like, some of our tenants are older, they remember, and so a skill that you have, you know, we also have people would read to children or buildings. The other thing is we have family buildings too, we have 13 family buildings, and so once a week, you know, someone would come in and read in the community group to the kids in the building. So that type of connection is something that's welcome. But you know, for the most part, we all, the building's open, we live in peace with the neighbors, and you know, so, but if people are interested in knowing the tenants and providing a cooking class, we actually had a group come in and do a cooking class on how to use a crock pot. And provided, actually gave each of our tenants who participated a crock pot, and then a whole bunch of recipes, you know, and so that was really great for the tenants to learn. You know, I have a tenant telling me that he burned a $6 steak. He burned a steak, and how he didn't know how to cook a steak, and he felt really bad because it was a lot of money. It was $6, and then it made me realize we don't teach our tenants how to cook a steak. You know, you know, other basic survival, but cooking classes are actually very welcome because people lose their skills, or they never even have them to begin with.
Over here, yes.
Have you heard of the 3D technology that they're using now that's creating incredible units of 4,000 a unit? I was just saying the 3D technology is emerging. It's creating units for literally 4,000 a unit. That's very humane and habitable, and also to be mobile, which is another issue I felt has never been adequately addressed, of having permanent fixtures of people and concentrations of people, histories, being on probation or mental affliction or untreated addictions. That any family is going to be concerned about that concentration. But if you have a mobile response where they can move for a period of time, kind of like the tent city model in Seattle, where communities basically invest in taking time to get to know the homeless actually are engaged in cleaning up the community and conducting sessions so they become more known to them. I mean, that's really the genius of this group, is they made them treat them like their neighbors. They know who they are. And it's a person-by-person assessment of how do we help you in the fullness of your humanity. Anyway, I just think that it's not a funding issue, it's a political will issue.
Yes, and ideally a time issue. I'm hearing you say time is money for you, as for all of us, but especially for you. So if you can cut the time down, that is actually saving us all money. So I hear. Any other questions about the process or what's happening here? Yes.
So much. Here we are. Could you talk a little bit more about the selection of the people that go into your units? I know at Santa Monica Shelter, for example, there are people, as you referred to, who have been on the streets longer, but it sounds like you're taking people for different reasons.
So it used to be that we would have a waiting list for our buildings, and we would close the waiting list because there's just too many people on them, right? So, but about 3 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, the federal government, through the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, that provides the large portion of funding to LAHSA, the local housing homeless continuum, to provide services for people who are homeless. In DC, they came up with this idea of a coordinated assessment, that essentially what they're requiring any local jurisdiction to do if they take their funds, which is substantial to address homelessness, that each community would be required to come up with some sort of assessment system for people who are homeless, score them based on their vulnerability. So if you've been homeless for a certain number of years, you get points. If you've been in the hospital multiple times, you get points. If you've been in the criminal justice system, you get certain points. So there's this point system. And health conditions, hypertension, diabetes, you also get additional points. So the higher the points, the higher the acuity, and those folks would get priority in housing. That was the HUD requirement. So they essentially slowly rolled this out throughout the country. Los Angeles is actually very advanced. We now have a system called the Coordinated Entry System, CES, for single adults, and we have the Family Solution Center for families. And then we realized that it was not working for young adults, kids living in the foster care system, people who are 18. Those systems and the ranking didn't work for them, and they were getting low prioritization. So there's now a new system for young adults between the ages of 18 or 16 and 24. So when we have a building that's opening up, or we have a vacancy in our existing supported housing development, I need to use that system. And that system is essentially a database. It's a very simplistic definition of it. It's divided into, they divided the county into 8 geographic areas called SPA, Service Planning Areas. So this is SPA 5, I believe. Okay, if you're nodding heads. And so this is SPA 5. So if I had an apartment that was a supported housing development, had a vacancy, I would go to the agency that's responsible for administering this coordinated entry system, and it's organized by SPA. That way, you can kind of target the localization a little bit more, so that if you're in Pacific Palisades, you're not drawing someone from San Pedro. So you would know that's from this particular geographic area. So I would put in a vacancy, and this is where the targeting comes in. I can say, I need a veteran, I need an older adult veteran, I need a veteran between this income level, I need a veteran that has experienced homelessness at least 365 consecutive days. So I could check off these boxes, and then I give it to this matcher. Someone's called, they actually have titles, job descriptions called matcher. So the matcher feeds my data in, spits out a name, and gives me the name. And yeah, and so it's a little, before, people on the waiting list, we get to know them, because we touch base with them once a year. Now we don't really know what we're getting. The person having said that, I still do know a lot, because I have their ranking. I know what their hospitalization, I know the criminal, it just helps me when someone comes in to have all this information, so that I can tailor the services to fit that person's need. So that's how the system works now. That's how we would house people. You can still specify what your needs are, but you don't really know what you're getting. Except if you work in that community, if you work in SPA 5, every agency in SPA 5 knows all the other agencies, and somebody entered that person into the system, and you would know who it is. So if the people concerned did the entering, I got a name and I see people concerned, I can call them and say, hey, you know this person. So the intention for this system is that the people who need the most concentrated services in housing will get it first. The people who are most vulnerable, who have a lot of disabilities, will get it first. And that there's no wrong door. Because if you are homeless and you are on the streets, or you're living in your shelter, you're living in your car, you don't know where to go. And it really was unfair. You would have to call me and say, do you have a vacancy? You have to call her, do you have a vacancy? So you're homeless, you really probably don't have a phone, so you're having to do this. But now if you're in the system, someone will find you and get you and say, your name's come up. And so there's no wrong door, and it's a lot easier for that person to access housing more immediately without having to ring a lot of doorbells.
Yes, question back here.
I just remembered that I read this week.
Hold the mic up to your mouth.
I just remember reading this week in the newspaper that there's a new app. LA Hop.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet. I have not tried it yet. And, actually, I shouldn't say that. I didn't try the app. I went to the website. So I'm not an app person. I'm a computer person. So I clicked on the link, and it was great. It actually had 4 things. Did you do it?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it tells you what to click on if you see someone homeless, you can click on it, and it will direct you to have someone come over. If you see something else happening, so there's different things you can click on based on what you're calling about or what you're inquiring about to get services and to get someone to call you back. So, HOP, H-O-P, I don't know what it stands for.
LA-HOP.org, and it'll take you out.
And also, it seems from the paper that it was for homeless people as well, to find you, and for you to find tenants
You're catching it. That's a flicker that we're about to end. Can the two of you comment a little bit on where you see the public approval process going, what the trending is for that? You both mentioned that as barriers. Are our elected officials working on streamlining that, and how optimistic are you from your two perspectives there?
Well, I would say that the city has actually really put a focus on this area, and they recognize the fact that it is so cumbersome, and we have had a lot of support, and I'm encouraged by things like the permanent supportive housing ordinance. I think it's really disappointing that this community group has filed this lawsuit, because it is going to delay things, and I don't know how that's going to turn out. The area that I think the city needs to really focus on, though, is some serious urban planning and looking at properties. The whole reason why we have this affordable housing crisis is because we started when the city of Los Angeles was originally zoned with 10 million households. And properties were zoned to accommodate 10 million households. And in the 60s and 70s, they were worried about traffic and pollution and congestion, and so they put overlay zones over a large number of the more dense multifamily properties and downzoned it to 4 million households. And that's basically Prop U, and that's where we are now. So you wonder why there are people living on the streets, and actually a large part of the homeless population are just people who need an affordable place to live too. You know, some of them have these mental disabilities who we're working with, but there probably are 30,000 people who don't have those disabilities. They can't qualify for the housing we're building. And so unless the city gets their act together and does some serious urban planning and takes off these overlay zones or finds in the traffic corridors how to encourage more dense developments and gives developers incentives instead of putting on things like rent control, then this problem is never going to be solved. So sorry to be a little outspoken.
I do that too. I'm going to start. So I was just doing some research also, some data, and I think of all the city's developable land, only about 14% of the city's developable land is zoned for multifamily development. And I have to double check the numbers, but it was something along those lines, and it was exact Prop U. That's why I found that same thing. And I think things are changing. I think, the numbers that you cited, 58,000 homeless people on the streets, it includes men, women, children. That's all that same number. And of that number, only about half of them have disabilities. The other half don't. They're just homeless for economic reasons. And, whether it's a medical situation, they lost their job, can't make the mortgage, the housing foreclosures thing that happened a few years ago. So all those, there's a whole bunch of folks who don't need permanent supportive housing. So it's not as daunting as 58,000. It's really for the people who don't have the help, the people with the disabilities, they need the help. But I do think it's changing. I think the public is pressuring our elected officials. There is the 222 plan. I don't know how many of you know about the 222 plan. Every single council member has committed to supporting 222 supportive housing, people with disabilities, supportive housing in their district. And there's a campaign from United Way called Everyone In. I don't know if you've heard the Everyone In campaign. I think it's also everyoneinDOT.org or something. And you will see, which is what I love, you will see each council member, you would see what the commitment to, how many they've approved, how many's actually been built. There's a running count on that website. So it is great, because I